Hello, I'm Karen Christensen, and I'm with you again to talk about third places. I have a really special opportunity today to talk to someone in Finland. It's just great for us to be able to reach across the world in this way, much as we believe in face to face, and this isn't quite the same. So my guest today is I'm going to introduce him by his first name and ask him to share his name in Finnish because I'm daunted by that. So Antti, welcome to the
Thank you so
podcast.
much. Yeah.
And thank you for speaking in English and writing in English. And please tell us, give us your name in Finnish, and then tell us a
S-
little about yourself and how we got connected here, which is exciting for me.
yeah. Wonderful. Thanks for having me. It really is a wonderful opportunity for myself, and I'm so looking forward to reading the updated edition of Great Good Place really soon. So I'm Antti Jauhiainen, and I'm a PhD researcher at University of Eastern Finland. And my PhD research is an ethnographic study of what we in Finland call bar parliaments, which is basically groups of regulars, some of whom have been, sitting in the same place for decades, coming, weekly or almost daily to the very same cafe or bar, sometimes gas station, to meet up and, drink a couple of beers or a couple of cups of coffee and, you know, talk about everything that's going on in their lives and in their communities. And I have to say, Oldenburg's book has been really important for me because, uh, and actually, he already wrote and talked about this back in the 80s that even though this kind of activity is so prevalent and these kinds of groups and these kind of places are so important for people, there still isn't that much sort of knowledge about them. Uh, and I noticed this myself when I started doing my research. It was actually pretty hard to find um, research and papers
What
on this topic.
inspired you to start studying these places?
Well, it's an interesting thing. My concern is about sort of for obvious reasons in today's world is about democracy, and I've lived in a welfare state my whole life, and I've
Mm-hmm.
actually written a book about welfare states
Mm-hmm.
10 years ago. Co-written a book on welfare states 10 years ago or so. Um, and I started thinking about because one of the ways of doing those kind of books is usually you interview, for example, experts, and you get expert opinions on, for example, the possibilities and future and so on. Um, but sort of gradually, even I think before the first Trump administration, but gradually over the years, I've sort of realized that there is a real concern about the future of our democracies. Um, and on the other hand, I feel that it's important to understand what creates democracy. Um, and I started thinking about it. And first, I was really pessimistic. But then, when I, for example, looked around in Finland, I realized there is a lot of people are still doing a lot of stuff, even though it isn't necessarily sort of political per se. Um, but it's something that really sustains their communities and helps them, go about their day-to-day lives, and also gives them optimism and sort of agency and capacity in their communities and in their families and their day-to-day lives. Uh, and one of the things I encountered was these groups of regulars in cafes and bars. And at first, I was just thinking that, whoa, this might be really important, and I gotta look up research on it. Um, and there wasn't that much research, especially in Finland, on these kind of groups. Uh, and then I sort of started the ball rolling on that one, trying to find out how I could research it. And I've been working as a primary school teacher for over 10 years. So it was sort of a career change in that regard. And I really love being a teacher as well. And I think in my research, it has helped me to connect with a lot of different people as well, because when doing ethnographic research like I've done, it's quite important that you're able to sort of come into different groups and understand the people and really listen to them. Listening
Yeah,
is a really big part of my
yeah.
research. So that's maybe in a nutshell how I ended up here.
And so, where? Tell us about where you live and where you were, where you first observed these places.
Yeah, that's a good one. The funny thing is that now that I've been doing my research, I've done in a lot of rural areas, but I've lived my whole life in the metropolitan Helsinki, so the capital of Finland. And that's sort of, I'm a city boy in that sense. Um, but I've sort of learned through this research about rural communities, and it's been really enlightening for me. But the very first places that I encountered it might have been maybe some places in Helsinki. I noticed, for example, that if I've been in a bar or cafe with friends, that the same people are there always. Another big one was a local public swimming hall. Public swimming halls and saunas are pretty common in
Yeah,
Finland
yeah,
because Finns love their saunas.
yeah.
And I've been going to swimming like every week. And then I noticed there's older men, for example, in the cafe, always going there. They first go to swim and sauna, and then they have a coffee and they talk about everything. And that's maybe one of the first places where I started thinking that what's going on there? This seems so organized, yet it isn't part of any sort of official
And
agenda.
yet it is. Yeah, it
Yeah,
seems that's an interesting thing. You're right about regulars because they clearly there is a rhythm and a routine to it. I was at a place the other day and someone said, "Oh, you're 15." To the other guy, he said, "Wow, didn't think you were coming today. You're 15 minutes late." And of course,
yeah,
they're not really on any schedule. Just he knew when to expect this other person to turn up.
yeah. And people might have like specific spots. They always go to the same chair and
Yep.
so
Yep.
on. So it's highly organized, I would say. But at the same time, it really isn't. And that's the whole point. I think that creates the flow and the trust and the sort of how people are able to talk so sort of freely and carefree in those environments, because there is a trust, there is continuity, there are sort of rituals about it, but at the same time everyone is constantly free to do, basically they don't have to come, they can do
Mm-hmm.
whatever they want. And I think that's important part of it, and that's very difficult to reproduce in any sort of like official, if you're trying to, for example, in Finland there has been projects that people try to create these kind of places for regulars or so on. And it's pretty hard because people really want their own agency.
Yes, this is something I've talked to people about a lot and covering in the book. People say they like, "Oh, I'm going to make a third place and I'm going to
Hmm.
schedule events." And it's really not the way things work. There's an organic nature to these things that I love. One of the terms Ray Oldenburg used was he talked about the regulars, how they commandeer a space.
Yeah.
They just it can be such odd places too. We are going to end up talk about gas stations. That definitely.
Yeah.
Let's talk.
Yeah.
Let's just stick with the bigger picture of Finland, which is a
Yeah.
country we hear about often in terms, very positive terms. In term and in various ways, in terms of its social life. But or I think happiness rankings, it comes
Hmm.
up,
Yeah.
and it's certainly come up in after the full scale invasion of Ukraine, the war, that Finland has responded to the potential threat in ways that were really quite really interesting and impressive. Showing a kind of a sort of a culture that is quite distinctive, and your language is very distinctive. So how do you think that what you're finding is distinct to Finland, and what is sort of just a phenomenon that's more general?
That's a good question. First of all, it is interesting that these kind of activities share certain uh, sort of recognizable things uh, from country to country. that people come there, like that it's not organized and so on, and people often come the same place and so on. But for Finland, one of the things I've been thinking about here is that Finland has pretty robust welfare state, and older people have good pensions, and then that enables them to be more active, and also meet up more and organize stuff in their communities and so on. And many of my groups are older people, and I have 5 like main groups in my research that I've been following for hundreds of hours. And it's I'm just sort of so happy for them that it's possible here to do that kind of stuff, and they can enjoy public swimming halls and go to restaurants or theater and so on, because of the pension system we have built. And maybe that's one of the things. Then I think also Finland has, talking as a primary school teacher here, a really nice public school system. And these people growing up, especially older people living up in 60s and 70s, they have really enjoyed sort of what I would call civilized society. They have learned to read books and talk about current issues and so on. And I think that shows up that what these people talk in these groups, and this has maybe been surprising, and I think it is a bit different, for example, from some of the research I've seen from United States and rural areas, is that people are pretty well informed about politics, and it's a contrast to the kind of stuff that you see online and on social media, and perhaps with younger people as well, is that even though they might be, for example, left-leaning or right-leaning when you talk about politics, but they aren't as sort of rough or nonsensible. They are actually pretty informed about politics, and the way they approach political issues, at least in my groups, seems to be more sort of even-handed. Maybe it's the social democratic tradition or something like that. But for example, with the changes in the United States, with the sort of right or far right administration of Donald Trump, and with the war in Ukraine, some of even the sort of, I was a bit surprised because I was sort of expecting maybe a more what you term polarization or something like that. And it's interesting when you meet up with people face to face, it just doesn't sort of make sense to be so sort of bullish and so angry and so on. I've actually interviewed with some of the people in my research and asked them, but have you had people who were really like angry or, and then the people might explain to me, or the people in the group say that, well, if someone comes there every time like really bullish about some political issues, people try to sort of calm them down a bit, that we're just having a coffee, you don't have to shout about everything. And I think that speaks, I think, for the benefit of these kind of places. It doesn't mean they are non-political. Of course they aren't. Of course these people talk about political issues and have an approach to them and their own sort of morals and values. But I think it differs a lot from what we see in social media. And I was glad. It was a bit surprising to me because I was expecting, based on maybe some of the research from the United States and so on, that might be more sort of polarized. Maybe that captures the term, even though as a researcher, there are problems with that one as too. But, but I really think what really comes out to me after spending so much time with these groups is that when you're meeting face to face with people, in general, there's so much more than just the current political issue at hand. There's like personal stuff, and then there's like really everyday stuff about if there are changes in the local community, and then there's also even more current stuff might be related to your own community and something that your group can sort of talk about and maybe do something about. And discussions on social media are much more ephemeral and much more sort of high clouded. Well, that's
and
a Finnish
just
term, but
a blast of It was funny. I don't use social media a lot, but I put something on Facebook, and suddenly there's this bl- blast of kind of pro-Trumpy stuff in response from someone I've never heard. I mean, completely random. And this long, long, long tirade, which I didn't bother to read. I just hid. But, I thought I, it, I guess I've isolated myself or insulated myself a little bit by just not doing this. But it it is quite remarkable how completely nuts people can be online. Who probably then, if you met
Yeah.
them face to face, they
Yeah.
might be quite mild.
Yeah. And when
Um,
we're meeting face to face, we have systems how to sort of deal with that. But online, and that's one of the reasons I'm sort of, because I really hope people would respect research more, because if you really want to talk about those sort of, high-minded questions about society and so on, that's partly why we have research, that we slowly research them and come up with, stuff about them. And I think it's completely different from the kind of stuff we talk about in day-to-day lives. And
yeah,
online, it becomes this much more heated discussion. And I'm not saying it's bad. I mean, it's, of course, we have really serious problems and serious discussions to be had. But I think something really is missing, if we don't have sort of face-to-face meetings and face-to-face discussions with people we know and we share a community with. Um,
yeah,
uh, that they sort of support, and I think it's a really big part of democracy. That's one of my main arguments, is that my
hmm,
research that, and I think it's something that sort of builds on Oldenburg's work, in a sense that I think, like, he talks about community and how important these meetings are for community, but I sort of dare to say that looking at the world in 2020s, they're really important to the way we've built up our democratic institutions. Our
yeah,
democratic institutions sort of unknowingly expect or assume that we have these third places and regulars and places where we can, calmly talk things over, year after year. And we actually don't have those places that much anymore.
yeah. It's certainly true in places in the United States. And Ray's last third place group was he was the only person who was not a Trump supporter.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And
Yeah.
they were some old guys, probably of similar age. And he was quite happy there.
Yeah.
I never met them, but they, and Ray was very much not a Trump supporter.
Yeah.
He was. Yeah, I mean, he wasn't a middle of the road about the political situation, but he still was completely comfortable being friends and regular with these guys. And that kind of thing. I think that kind of ability to connect with people in spite of difference, because understanding that we still have we have things in common is super important.
Yeah.
Now, I'm
And
going to
that's,
ask
yeah.
you, yeah,
Yeah.
I need to explain it because you're an expert on, you've written a book about welfare society, welfare state. And I think that there are plenty of American listeners who simply don't know what that means. What it's like.
Well,
What?
yeah, welfare state means that you have higher taxes, but you have to pay so much for tuition or daycare or hospitals. That's the very blunt way to put about it. Because this is something I've talked with my friends living in the United States, that when we add up everything, that, I have to pay more taxes. Uh, but on the other hand, they don't have to pay so much taxes, but they have to pay all sorts of different fees to, for insurances and daycare and tuitions and so on. Whereas in Finland, we have systems set up for now. I think it's a big shift that's happening in general. Is that the idea of welfare states is under attack because, of course, it's more profitable for companies, for example. Well,
Correct.
I wouldn't actually say in short term. I would say in short term, because companies in Finland and for example, in Nordic countries have been hugely profitable despite the welfare states. And I would argue that actually welfare states actually really help businesses, and a lot of businesses argue for that as well. But I would say welfare state is somewhere where the state sort of makes an effort through taxation and wealth distribution to create more equal opportunities for example, for children coming from poor families. And I myself, I'm actually come from a really poor family, and I was in orphanages when I was a child, and my parents were alcoholics and so on. And I think part of that has influenced my view on welfare states is that at some point I realized that if I had lived in another kind of state, I might have ended up in a really bad situation. Whereas now I
Right.
was able to go to university and everything,
Yeah.
despite coming from a really poor family.
Yeah. Certainly here, the level of anxiety that one hears about affordability, people say affordability in general, they really mean housing, they mean daycare, they mean education for their kids, and worry about, yeah, housing is a huge thing. I mean, people talk more, you hear about food prices, but actually Americans don't spend a lot on food, in terms of a percentage of their income compared to many countries. But we do, and we have the issue of healthcare, which is such a source of enormous stress for people, because you don't know, because it's both really expensive to insure, but then there are, unexpected costs, and it's really, it creates such a sense of anxiety in people that I think leads to a lot of the conflict that we see.
Yeah. Yeah, and it was something that in post-war Finland, the Second World War was really sort of harsh for Finland because we really had to fight
Yeah.
tooth and nail against Soviet Union to be able to preserve our independence.
Yeah.
And I think there was a general sense back in those days that we really have to take care of everyone in order to survive. And those are the kind of ideas behind why we build up welfare state. And I think I'm maybe optimistic by nature, but despite these kind of harsh times we're living through, I really think that they might, even in the United States, people might sort of learn over time something from this. And this has been something that's inspiring for me to have been able to do research with older people. In my research, that these people have a sort of perspective over generations. And they can, for example, approach something like Vladimir Putin or Donald Trump in a sense that, these guys come and go. That,
Yeah.
they huff and they puff and they create all sorts of mess. But at the end of the day, someone else has to come and clear up the mess and do the
Yeah.
responsible thing. And this has been a sentiment that I, for example,
Mm-hmm.
from my research people, that a
Uh-huh.
lot of those echo, despite being left or right wing. They, at least in Finland, they sort of view that, when you're an older person, you realize that these kind of, waves happen.
Yeah.
And I think it's a wise approach to democracy. And if we want to build a sort of long-term society, instead of, really living in that here and now everything must change or something, more calm approach. And I think welfare state protects that as well.
Mm-hmm. Well, there certainly are things that we can, models that you have in Finland that I think are really important. And one of the things, although Ray and I never talked about sauna in particular, he did bring up he'd heard of geothermal baths in Iceland and wanted me to look at
Yeah.
that. But
And I think Turkey baths are a big thing as well.
baths, once I started to look at public baths, Japan,
Yeah.
some examples in China, the Middle East, the public bath, and England has an amazing array of really quite marvelous public baths that are being restored. Not the same tradition around them, quite that, but tell us about the Finnish tradition, and how does that relate then to what you're finding with the bar parliament? A term that I need to know is is that a term that's familiar in Finnish, or did you coin that? I think it's
No,
a
it's
very
it's very familiar in Finland. It's something we use here. It's like it's bar or coffee parliaments. So and it's I think in some other languages there is something similar because it comes from the sort of very simple observation that there's a group of people talking excitedly, and they're usually around a round table, and there's just something that sort of makes it feel like a parliament.
It's a great one, which I will be mentioning, and Ray Oldenburg really would have enjoyed.
It's a funny one, because something I struggle sometimes with is that, because these groups really aren't official. That's like the main thing, that they aren't organized, they aren't official, they aren't flying under any flag of any parliament, so to speak. But I think that's just a sort of funny juxtaposition. I think that they are our parliaments. And I like to say that, Finland is a land of 1,000 lakes, but we're also a land of 1,000 parliaments. These groups gather around everywhere, and they are our parliaments. But coming to saunas, I have to say that there's a lot that resembles these, and I hope it's a thing for my future research, because it's quite difficult to research, because it's such an vulnerable place when you're in sauna. And people have it's really interesting, because the heat also sort of sets a time limit to discussions. And they're really sort of interesting stuff. And every time I've gone to rural areas to do my research, I've always made a point to visit the local public baths, and most communities or towns in Finland have them, and to sort of sit around in sauna and sort of secretly listen and make notes afterwards about discussions, so that I can learn. And there's so much, people talk about local politics and just, their lives and divorces and everything in sauna with people they don't know. And then there's also the kind of third place activity going on, that certain guys might go the same sauna at the same time, every, regular days, that on Tuesdays and Thursdays they go at 10 a.m. to sauna. So there's a lot of that. I think they are really important here.
And how many of them are there? Are they really easy to find?
Public saunas, like what we call in Finland like folks saunas, or like that are available to everyone. I think there's a couple of hundred of them in Finland. There are a lot of them, and Finland built a really nice network of public swimming halls in the 60s and 70s, and all of those, of course, have a sauna. But then, along the lakes, then ice swimming is really popular in Finland, so they often have saunas with them. And people have a lot of discussions there. Just last week, I was in a sauna in Finland, and like a public sauna, and everyone was talking all the time. So it's really nice. But then if you go to the private saunas, like people have their own saunas, that there's probably over 1 million of them here. It's a lot. Because even like big, ordinary apartments in ordinary street blocks in Finland, the apartments have small saunas oftentimes. So they really want to have the saunas.
The Japanese have a term that means naked bonding, and because the Japanese are very big on bathing, and then they have public.
It's the same in Finland,
right?
Yeah.
I mean, one of the more amusing stories in news stories in recent years was I can't remember if it was during possibly the first Trump presidency, that the Finnish embassies added a sauna, and then would invite
that's a good one.
Foreign diplomats to discuss things in the sauna.
And we were famous because we had a long sort of time that we had to do diplomacy with Soviet Union in the 60s, 70s, 80s during the Cold War. And it's pretty famous that Finns oftentimes took the Russian politicians and generals to Finnish saunas, and then put on the heat, and
right,
who's the toughest one? And Finns are pretty tough, and the Russians respected that.
Right. Yes. You could make a play. I wonder if there's, there might be a lesson here in when it comes to third places and the polarization that we're talking about here, is actually finding ways to invite people in. And one of the complaints people have about the Democratic Party here is they've become very online and they don't go and actually talk to people. They will hold meetings or fundraisers, but not go to picnics, not go to bars, not go to coffee shops, not go to diners the way they used to. They want to do everything online. And I wonder if there's really needs to be this, when I think about Finns inviting those they have to deal with, maybe we need to find ways to use hospitality as a way just to get more conversations going.
Yeah, but I bet it's difficult in current day politics because I think one of the things that is really built in the third places is sort of long-termism, or this kind of that you really have
Yes.
to be there. You really
Yes.
have to be a part of the community.
It's not the first time you meet there that you're
Yeah,
gonna.
and it's pretty hard to.
It's the
Yeah,
third, the fourth, the fifth, the sixth when you start
yeah,
to begin to really break down some
yeah.
barriers.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I think the
Yes.
sort of agenda-free approach is important as well, because at least in Finland, people in general instantly trust you a little bit less if you have an agenda, and the shared agenda of just having a coffee, the shared agenda of just that we're here just to have a good time for a little
Yeah.
while. I think that's hugely important for the trust and
Mm-hmm.
for those discussions to develop into the kind of discussions that people really enjoy.
Yeah.
And I think
That,
that's
that
really
they
hard to
enjoy.
replicate with programs or agendas.
Right. Right. Well, let's wrap up by talking about one of the oddest things that you brought up when I first heard from you, but has come up with other people in other ways, is gas stations. Why
Yeah.
do people meet at gas stations?
Well, in Finland it's interesting because Finland is and of course, gas stations are everywhere. They aren't that, they've been around for 100 years or so.
Yeah.
It isn't that as old as cafes or bars. Um, but gas station pretty quickly became really established place for people. And at least in Finland, there's also been a thing that, for example, with bars, sometimes there's too much drunk people there. So it doesn't work for those kind of everyday, because people go there to, do a big evening and drink a lot, and
Yeah.
sometimes that's not good for the kind of third place kind of meetings,
Yeah.
even though sometimes it can work very well.
Mm-hmm.
But with gas stations, and then the other part is that Finland has a very different coffee culture from, say, Central Europe.
Uh-huh.
Central Europe has really this nuanced and good coffee and fine beautiful things, maybe a bit of more of an upper class thing.
Uh-huh.
But in
Uh-huh.
Finland, coffee places are really working class places. Uh, and I think gas stations fit that really well.
Uh-huh.
So once the gas stations started appearing in Finland in 50s and 60s,
Uh-huh.
and there was also, some of them also offer beer, actually.
Uh-huh.
And there's a lot of men coming there, and they're away from home,
Mm-hmm.
and they're also away from work. And it just sort
Mm-hmm.
of happens to be a really sort of practical place to meet. You fix up a
And they
little
can
bit
get
your
coffee.
car,
They can
yeah,
get
and they
coffee.
can get coffee there. Yeah, basically every gas station in Finland that isn't fully automated is serving coffee, and drinking coffee at the gas station is like a really big thing here. Uh, so yeah, maybe that's it. But it's they are a big thing in Finland, but that also is undergoing a change, because the same thing that's happening with coffee places elsewhere is that this huge change take over them, and can that sort of replicate with third place, and how does it affect them? But I've been happy to see that even if a chain takes over, the regulars and the third place people, the people who inhabit those places, they still at least try their best to find their way there. And if it's a bit longer way, I know some truck drivers who take a detour of 100 kilometers to go to the specific gas station where their friends are meeting.
That's their hangout.
Yeah.
I would never have guessed that, but I was listening to a podcast from Iowa radio, and they were talking about gas stations. That was really because there wasn't anywhere else.
Mm-hmm.
That was that was in the rural Midwest, and so that was a different matter. But in the South too.
And I think it's partly in Finland as well, because Finland has a small population.
Yeah.
And we are still a pretty big country, so the distances are big. So gas stations are pretty important.
It's a place where people can be. Well, thank you so much. And, this is fascinating. You've added some great material to my thinking, my book. And I think that Finland offers us some really, really useful examples. And I especially have to thank you for doing this in English, which is, so much appreciated.
Yeah, and I've been really happy to talk. And like I said, I'm really looking forward to updated edition, because it's Ray's old book is so sort of, I think everyone should check it out, at least browse through it, even though they're not researchers or anything. It's just such a window to the way we live our lives that it's useful for everyone.
And I will put a link to your current research, which is in English, or whatever you want to give me to share, so people can look into it more. And I will hope there'll be a chance to visit Finland. I've now heard so much about it from different people. I'm really eager to get there.
Yeah. Please come.
Yeah, great.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you. I will send you a link when we're up and ready to roll, and keep me posted.
Yeah, we'll stay in touch. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Yeah, bye.